Did you know that YouTube is actually named after the digestive system? Because a tube. You are a tube. I mean, that's what the digestive system is. The tube of your body. And if I were to take your tube from mouth to anus, it would measure about 27 feet long. So what is this tube and why do we have it? Well, the answers are in the digestive system. Hey everybody, this is Organized Biology, and today we are going to go through the digestive system in several different parts. In this first part, we're going to talk about the goals of the digestive system. So let's get right into it. Any system of the body is just a collection of organs doing some sort of common purpose, okay? And the common purpose of these organs in the digestive system fall into three main goals. Those goals begin with, obviously, digesting your food. Because digest literally means to break apart. So what you're doing is you're taking your food that you eat and you are breaking it down into molecules. Now the reason you have to break this food down into molecules, which are literally microscopic, is because the cells of your body lining the tube from mouth to anus must bring in molecules that are smaller than them. So you're going to take your food, break it down into molecules. Now there's two main ways your body does this. The first way it does this is through what's called mechanical digestion. And as the name kind of implies, this is when there's some sort of mechanical force that's going to break big pieces into small pieces. So for example, this would be like your teeth. Your teeth exist to take these big chunks of food and to break them down before you swallow. That's the first type of digestion, is mechanical. However, there's a second type as well, and this is called chemical digestion. Chemical digestion occurs when enzymes, which are literally like molecular scissors, so tiny little scissors in your body, are going to chop the molecules up on a microscopic level. So these enzymes kind of do the last job, okay? They're going to be snipping molecules up into their base unit. One such enzyme is called lipase. This means lipid, which is like a fat, so think oils and animal fats. And then ACE refers to an enzyme that breaks things down, okay? So the lipase enzyme, which your body makes, helps you break down lipids on a molecular level, on a microscopic level. So we kind of see how this is a macro view, a big picture view, mechanical digestion, breaking big things down to smaller things. Then chemical takes those smaller bits and literally chops them up on a molecular level. You need both in order to digest your food properly. Now, the second goal of the digestive system would be absorption of those nutrients. So you're going to take these molecules, the nutrients, and you're going to absorb them. But what does this actually mean to absorb these nutrients? This means your cells, so all of the little functional units lining your intestinal tract, are going to draw those nutrients into the bloodstream. Key point, we're putting these things into the bloodstream, and the bloodstream goes everywhere, okay? If you haven't watched my Anatomy and Physiology Helpful 10 Tips, please watch that video here. That will help you understand what the bloodstream does, as well as several other things to help you understand anatomy and physiology. This process generally looks like this. You'll have the nutrients that were just broken down by the digestive processes, and those nutrients are going to be drawn in through the cells of your gastrointestinal tract, so your stomach and your intestines, and they are going to pass into the bloodstream. We'll talk more about this at a later point. But it just goes to show you that the first part is so imperative because we have to have these nutrients really, really tiny to actually be drawn into your cells, which are also very tiny, and then get into your bloodstream. Awesome. So from there, once they get into the bloodstream, all of those nutrients will be able to distribute everywhere. The blood goes to virtually every cell of your body, and that bloodstream will deliver those nutrients. So really important process here. Now, the last goal of the digestive system is to move the food through a one-way tract. Okay, so as the food passes into your mouth, down your esophagus, and etc., you want it to go in a one-way direction all the way through, eventually ending in elimination of whatever is left over, okay? Now, how do we keep things going in one direction? To make this one way, we are going to use valves. Valves help prevent backflow. And these are actually really common structures in other organ systems like the cardiovascular system to prevent blood from going in the backwards direction as well. So there you have it. The goals of the digestive system are to break the food down into molecules through digestion, to absorb the nutrients into the bloodstream through the cells, and then finally move all the excess food all the way out of the body through the anus, and those are the goals. So in the next part, we're going to talk about specific structures of the digestive system and how they function to achieve these goals. Next up in the digestive system is the anatomy, which refers to the structures of the digestive system. We divide the anatomy into two main categories, okay? The first one, in blue as I diagrammed, is called the alimentary canal. This is just the tube of the digestive system, starting from mouth and ending in anus, okay? But surrounding the alimentary canal will be pink structures, which are called accessory structures. These are going to aid in digestion. And a lot of them are going to be what's called exocrine glands. And exocrine glands literally means outside secretion, which means they're going to pour something into the alimentary canal to help aid in specifically chemical digestion. So they'll likely be adding enzymes, as we talked about previously. But here's a question. Why is it exocrine? Because if this means outside secretion, I'm telling you that these glands are going to dump products into the alimentary canal, so the tube. Why is this considered outside secretion? Shouldn't it be inside secretion? You're secreting it into the tube? No, because think about this. The inside of the tube, from mouth to anus, is consistent with the outside of your body. Don't believe me? If you were Elasti-Woman from like The Incredibles, and you stuck your hand into your mouth and pushed it all the way down those 27 feet of the tube, could you reach back out and feel the air outside and maybe slap yourself in the face? It's always a very beautiful picture for my students to hear. But here's a key point. The inside of the tube is consistent with the outside of your body. But now once those nutrients are drawn into the bloodstream, now it's technically inside of your body. So the bloodstream is inside your body. The gut tube, the alimentary canal, is actually outside of your body. That's a weird idea you should go tell your parents about. Then they'll tell you not to watch my videos ever again. But you know better, so click that subscribe button if this has been helpful. Or don't. So let's get into the structures here. So I'm going to start with the alimentary canal and go all the way down through the 27 feet of your tube. The first part is going to be called, obviously, your mouth or oral cavity. Anytime you hear the word cavity, it just means opening, and oral refers to the mouth. From there, it's going to pass into the esophagus. This is where food will travel when you swallow. Now, there's two valves here that we need to know about. And remember, valves prevent backflow. So the first valve I'll point out will be called the upper esophageal valve, which is shortened up UEV, the upper esophageal valve. This is the first valve that when you swallow, it'll actually push open so that food will travel in a one-way direction down your esophagus. Once it reaches the end of the esophagus, it's about to enter the stomach, and it's going to reach the lower esophageal valve. Easy to remember. This one's sometimes called the cardiac sphincter because it's located about where your heart would be. Now, I obviously just used a new word, sphincter. Well, anytime you hear sphincter or valve, they basically mean the same thing. It's going to prevent it from going the other direction. So it's a one-way ticket all the way to the anus, right? That sounded weird too. Once we get through the cardiac sphincter, we are going to enter the stomach. This is where a lot of digestion and breakdown will occur before passing into the first part of the small intestine. Now, before we get into the small intestine, we have to pass through a valve called the pyloric sphincter. Pyloric or pylorus usually means the end part of the stomach. So this is like the pyloric region of the stomach. And it's going to pass through the pyloric sphincter before entering into the small intestine. Two other parts of the stomach you may need to know is the greater curvature of the stomach, which is this part. Obviously, it's a greater curve, it's bigger. And then there's the lesser curvature of the stomach. Anatomically speaking, the stomach has three parts. The first part on the top of the stomach will be called the fundus. I think that's kind of fun. Then the main part of the stomach here will be called the body of the stomach, ending in the pylorus, which makes sense because we have the pyloric sphincter that it will pass through after leaving the stomach. And now we move into the small intestine. The small intestine will have three main parts. The first part of the small intestine will be called the duodenum. This is where a lot of mixing will occur. We see in a couple other structures are going to be dumping and stuff into that area, as well as the stomach's first contents are going to pass into this small little pocket called the duodenum. This is only a few centimeters long, about 25 centimeters long, so not very long. From there, it will pass into what's called the jejunum. The jejunum is a couple meters long, and this is where a lot of absorption will occur, followed by the ileum. Once again, the ileum is a couple meters long and a lot of absorption will happen in this part of the small intestine. So the food will continue passing through the small intestine until it reaches this valve right here, which is called the cecum, or the cecal valve. And this is where we will enter the large intestine, otherwise known as the colon. Now the colon will have four main parts, which I will label here. The first part of the colon is going to be going upwards, which is nice because it's called the ascending colon. And the second part goes across the body, which across the body usually means transverse. So this is the transverse colon. From here, we pass through the transverse colon and start going down. Can you guess what this one will be called? If you guessed descending colon, you'd be correct because it's going down. And the last part of the colon will be called the sigmoid colon. The reason for that is because it has kind of an S shape to it, which sigmoid usually refers to the letter S. Now here in the large intestine, we usually call this stuff left over as feces, right? Or poop. And once it passes all the way through the large intestine, it's going to reach a small little storage area called the rectum. And when we want to eliminate or defecate that feces, it will reach the anus. And as you see, the anus has two very tiny little sphincters. The first one is inside, so it's called the internal anal sphincter. Whereas the one right here looks like it's on the external part of the body, so it's called the external anal sphincter. So there you have it. That is the alimentary canal and its valves. Now, another key point you may hear in class is this term called peristalsis, and that just basically means the contraction of the tube. So as food moves all the way through here, there will be these peristaltic waves, basically like the tube pushing and pushing and pushing things through it. Have you ever seen a python eat food? That's what your alimentary canal does. So to demonstrate this, you can actually get a long sock and some sort of object. This is a candle holder, don't tell my wife. And if I want to get the food all the way to the end of the sock, what do I have to do? Well, I will likely compress behind the food and it will propel that food forward. So this is exactly what will happen in the alimentary canal. So as I'm contracting behind it, over here in front of it, it will actually open up and dilate. So as we continue to push and push and push, we've got this contraction and dilation occurring, eventually ending up at the end of my tube sock. And now I guess you could use it as a nunchuck if you want to. Don't try this at home. So now let's take a look at the accessory structures. Remember, the accessory structures are going to aid in digestion in some way, shape, or form. So starting off, let's talk about the teeth, which are found in your mouth. Your teeth exist, obviously, to break down large chunks of food into smaller chunks. And you have four main types of teeth. You have your incisors, you have your canines, your premolars, and your molars. Incisors are the flat ones at the front of your mouth. So I want you to count how many you have. I got the number 8. Did you? So you have 4 incisors on the top, 4 incisors on the bottom. And these incisors, once again, are flat, so they help you tear up your food. The next one will be the canines. The canines are sharp. So go ahead and count. How many canines do you have? I counted 4, did you? Awesome. So you have 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom, and these are primarily for attaching and then ripping apart food. This is actually one indication that we are meat eaters. We're meant to eat meat. Sorry, vegetarians. The next ones are your premolars, and I'm just going to tell you there are 8 premolars. And then you have 12 molars if you haven't gotten your wisdom teeth removed. And both of these guys will exist to grind up your food. They are very flat with some ridges, and that'll help basically grind up different plant matter and other foods that you may eat. So you got 2 premolars on each quadrant, so therefore you have 8. And then you have 12 molars, 3 on each quadrant, therefore you will have 12. Unless you have your wisdom teeth taken out, if you've done that, then you only have 8 molars. Now moving more posterior, in the mouth you have 3 main salivary glands. The biggest one more posterior, kind of near your cheek, is called the parotid salivary gland. The one right underneath your mandible is called your submandibular. And then the one right underneath your tongue is called your sublingual. So these two make sense, submandibular underneath the mandible and sublingual, which lingual means language, so you produce language with your tongue, therefore sublingual. These salivary glands are going to help secrete, obviously, saliva into the oral cavity to help break down some sorts of nutrients in your mouth before being swallowed. Once it gets swallowed, the next accessory structures we run into will be the liver and the pancreas. Both of these will secrete a ton of different enzymes into the duodenum of the small intestine. And this will help really ramp up chemical digestion of food. We're going to break down a ton of different foods and nutrients into their base units to be absorbed in the small intestine into your bloodstream. Now, the last accessory structure is that gosh darn appendix. Now, you may think the appendix has absolutely no function, and a lot of people say that's relatively accurate. There have been recent studies that actually explain that the appendix can be a haven for good bacteria. You see, there are all sorts of bacteria in your large intestine, in your colon, that do a variety of things to help you absorb some sorts of vitamins and to break down wastes and etc., just to basically help you be healthy. And in return, they get to eat whatever's in your poop, which is a symbiotic relationship. Kind of weird though. But a lot of them will be housed in the appendix just in case maybe some diarrhea occurs. So a lot of bacteria are getting flushed out, or maybe you take antibiotics, kill off a bunch of those bacteria, so then those good bacteria housed in the appendix will hop out and repopulate the colon. But obviously, sometimes the appendix can get plugged up, inflamed, and then you have appendicitis, and you have to remove the appendix because it could, burst and release all the bacteria and crap, literally, pun intended, into that space in your abdomen, which is really, really dangerous. So there you have it. There's the anatomy of the digestive system. In the next video, we're going to describe the specific things that are secreted into the alimentary canal, as well as what happens in every single segment of that tube from mouth to anus. We are going to talk about the specific organs in the alimentary canal, how they will digest, as well as what they will absorb. Now, before we get into it, I need you to know the color scheme. If I draw something in blue, it means that that structure or that molecule will digest carbohydrates. If I do pink, that means it's going to digest proteins. And then red will be lipids. And these are your three main macromolecules, the macros for short. Now, if it's in teal, I think this is teal, I'm kind of colorblind, it will be dealing with mechanical digestion. So think about this. Mechanical, remember, is physical force, and these three will actually be chemical digestion, dealing with enzymes and other chemicals to break them down. So let's get started. So first off, when we put food into our mouths, it will only stay in our mouths for a few seconds before swallowing. How do you think we'll digest things in the mouth? Well, first off, we're obviously going to use our teeth for some mechanical digestion, and then look at the accessory structures we have. We have the salivary glands. And the salivary glands are going to secrete some enzymes that are going to begin breaking down macromolecules. So the first one in blue, because it's going to be breaking down carbohydrates, is called salivary amylase. Anytime you see AMY or AMY, it means carbohydrate, and ACE means enzyme. So it's an enzyme breaking down carbohydrates. And we will also have a small amount of what's called lingual lipase. This is very negligible, there's not a lot of it, but both of these will be secreted by these salivary glands to help start chemically breaking down both carbohydrates and fats. Furthermore, in the mouth, you can actually absorb some substances, specifically some drugs. One being something called nitroglycerin. This is a drug that actually helps relieve chest pain or angina pectoralis. So once the food is swallowed and moves into the stomach, it will stay in the stomach for about 1 to 3 hours, give or take, depending on what's in it. Now, the stomach will have some mechanical digestion in the form of churning. So the stomach is an amazing structure. It can expand very, very large compared to its resting state, and it will actually contract and move and mix food inside of it. That's called churning and mixing. And within the stomach itself, it will also secrete some different things to help initiate digestion. One thing being gastric lipase. Anytime you see the word gastro or gastric, it refers to stomach, and then lipase, once again, is breaking down lipids. The stomach cells will also secrete two other things. One will be called pepsinogen. Now, pepsinogen, pep usually refers to protein, and ogen means inactive. So this is an enzyme specifically that's going to chop up proteins, but it's inactivated right now. So we need to activate it. And the way we activate pepsinogen is going to be through hydrochloric acid. Okay, so hydrochloric acid will actually activate pepsinogen and turn it into something called pepsin. Pepsin is the active protein enzyme that will chop up the proteins. And furthermore, hydrochloric acid does a couple other things. Number one, it unravels proteins to help pepsin work better, and it also has an immune component because a lot of things cannot live in a really acidic environment. So hydrochloric acid basically kills off any sort of bacteria or pathogens that could have been getting into your stomach. Now the stomach will also do a little bit of absorption. There are three main things I want you to remember that the stomach absorbs. One being water. And this makes sense because if you've ever just chugged a big glass of water, you usually have to pee relatively quickly. That's because the water gets absorbed quickly in your stomach. The second thing being alcohol, and the third thing being aspirin. And this makes sense because although contents aren't in the stomach for that long, you can usually feel the effects of alcohol and aspirin relatively quickly because they're being absorbed directly through the walls of the stomach. So here we've digested a lot of different things, specifically lipids, proteins, and we've kind of churned and mixed everything together. So now all of that food stuff is going to move into the small intestine, specifically the duodenum. And I want you to think of the duodenum as the main mixing center. And that's because you can see here that the liver, the pancreas, and the stomach are all dumping their contents into this one area called the duodenum, a really small chunk of the small intestine. So at the duodenum, a lot of digestion is going to occur, which makes sense because we're going to start absorbing a lot of things in the small intestine. So the first things we'll talk about are the secretions from the pancreas. The pancreas will release enzymes called chymotrypsin and trypsin, and these enzymes will help to break down proteins. The pancreas will also secrete pancreatic lipase, enzyme that breaks down fats, and it'll also secrete pancreatic amylase. And this will break down carbohydrates. Now, another thing the pancreas secretes that doesn't deal with digestion is actually sodium bicarbonate. Now, this is a molecule that will actually neutralize the acid. Because think about it, as things are moving from the stomach to the small intestine, there's a lot of hydrochloric acid there, and acid burns through cells sometimes, okay? So when we get there, we need to neutralize it with the sodium bicarbonate so that all the stuff passing into the duodenum aren't very acidic. Wonderful. And now let's talk about what the liver will secrete. The liver will release something called bile that's originally stored in the gallbladder before it's secreted into the duodenum. And bile will do something called emulsification of fats. This basically helps to clump up fats into smaller and smaller pieces so that then they can be absorbed easier later on. And at this point, guys, look at how many enzymes and different mechanical digestion occurrences have happened. So by this point, we should have taken basically every big scale food item and chopped it into molecules, which remember was the first goal of the digestive system, to break food down into molecules. So at this point, we are going to enter the longest section of your digestive tract, the duodenum and the ileum, which are the latter points of the small intestine. And the main goal of these areas are going to be to absorb those nutrients. So there will not be any digestion occurring here, but we will absorb basically all the macromolecules, vitamins, minerals, etc. So compared to the previous absorption of the mouth and the stomach, this is where the magic happens. The small intestine is where all this absorption will occur, and this stuff will stay in the small intestine for about 2 to 6 hours before being passed into the large intestine. So now we've passed into the large intestine or the colon. And although this isn't that long of a length, just a couple meters, it's actually going to stay in the large intestine from anywhere to 10 to 60 hours. There's not going to be any digestion occurring here, except for maybe a little bit of breakdown from bacteria. Basically, the bacteria are just going to eat up the rest of the stuff that we have left in this large intestine. There are some absorptive properties of the large intestine. Specifically, we're going to absorb more water, some minerals and salts, as well as vitamin B12. And once some of this absorption happens and all of that feces continues to get pushed through the large intestine, it's eventually going to be eliminated through the rectum and the anus. Now, I've saved probably the most important point for last. As you can see, basically from the stomach all the way down through the large intestine, we are absorbing basically all of the nutrients that we need. And remember that absorption means to put it into the bloodstream. But everything that is absorbed in these areas is actually going to travel first to the liver. This is called the hepatic portal system. Hepatic usually refers to liver, and what the liver will do is it will take these nutrients and basically decide what to do with them. So for example, if you drank some alcohol, the liver will actually break down some of that alcohol before it gets into the rest of the blood circulation. This is important so you don't have heightened toxicity immediately, right? The liver will also decide, hey, if we have plenty of, say, carbohydrates, maybe we need to store some of them, or maybe for fats, we need to store some fats. So basically, the liver just acts as like the Amazon warehouse factory, right? It receives all of these boxes and things and determines where they need to go. Do they need to get dumped in the bloodstream first? Do they need to be stored? Do they need to be detoxified? What have you? And that's really, really important to go there first. But if you absorb things through the mouth, it actually just goes directly into the systemic bloodstream. So it bypasses this liver portal system and just goes everywhere immediately. And the same holds true with the absorption in the anus. So that's one reason you can actually take medications up through the anus, because you will absorb them directly into the bloodstream and it'll go everywhere before going to the liver first. So is your anus very similar to your mouth and your mouth similar to your anus? Yeah, it is. So as we finish up this part of the digestive system, we're going to move into the next part here, which is going to deal with the cellular level of absorption for the three main macromolecules. Thanks for watching.